Hey guys, and welcome to my channel. If you are new here, this is The Reader's Wand and I am Ashley. Let's talk about the 22 books that I read in April. The first book is The Kiss Quotient by Helen Huang. This is a romance about a female autistic economist and a male who loves fashion. So our female main character hires the male escort to show her the ways of sex and just that whole interaction, and I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. I thought that the representation was great. It is an own voices story and I thought it was fantastic. In addition to that, our male character is into fashion and he is Vietnamese. All around great. The romance was very sweet. Our male main character didn't really ask our female main character to explain herself. He didn't ask about any of her quirks or anything like that. He just let her become acclimated with the whole process and was very sweet about the whole thing. Next, I read My Favorite Half-Night Stand by Christina Lauren. This is a friends to lovers romance about 2 friends in a friend group of, I believe, 4 or 5, who they all sign up for a dating website, and when these 2 friends match, a romance between them starts. They had previously hooked up before they match on this dating website, and they start to grow feelings for each other, one of them knowing that they had matched with their friend and the other one not. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. I really related with the female main character a lot. She was very closed off. She was very emotionless. She didn't allow herself to really get attached. She didn't really talk about personal things with her friends. She was just kind of the friend that helped everyone but didn't really ask much from anyone. The thing that really detracted me from the story was the relationships that our male main character had. He was essentially involved with 3 women through the whole book, even though one of them was, 2 of them were the same woman. He didn't know that, and even though he wasn't exclusive with any of them, I didn't like the way that he handled the situation. He knew that he only wanted one of them, like he really wants a relationship with our female main character, but he never expresses that. He never does anything like that, and he kind of just trails the 3 women along however he wants. Next, I read Dark Matter by Blake Crouch. This is a sci-fi series about a man who gets kidnapped, injected with a drug, and basically wakes up in a different life than is his. His previous life, he was a professor, he had a wife and a child, and when he wakes up, he's this well-renowned scientist, and he tries to figure out what happened. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. This was my foray into adult sci-fi, and I was really impressed. The plot was gripping from beginning to end, and while not a lot of the nitty-gritty plot points, like the actual meat and potatoes of why this is happening and how this is happening, was really dense, I didn't find it inaccessible, mind-numbing, or pretentious. I really felt like it was explained, not in a dumbed-down way, but in just an easy way to understand. And while the point of the story wasn't really nuanced, it wasn't really hidden, Crouch really told you right up front what he wanted you to get from the book. I didn't really have an issue with that. I don't have to leave a story with the questionable morals, I guess. I don't need to have to guess the intention of the writer. It's okay for me to be told what the writer wants me to get from the story. Next, I read The Right Swipe by Alicia Ray. This is the love story of a retired NFL player and a female that runs a dating website, and I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. I really loved our main male character. He was very soft. He really expressed to our female character what he wanted and how he was feeling about her, and he was willing to atone for the misdeeds that she felt like he did to her. And I really liked our female main character as well. She was sort of like a lot like the main character in My Favorite Half-Night Stand. She was kind of detached and not, kind of keeping people at an arm's length because of her past, and I really connected with her. I really liked this. I couldn't say anything more. Next, I read The Poet X by Elizabeth Acevedo. This is a story written in this form of slam poetry about a young girl living in Harlem who is growing and having to come to terms with her body and the community's feelings about her body and their responses, in addition to her mother's spirituality, her feelings of spirituality, her response to the church, her response to boys. Just a coming of age story. And I listened to the audiobook for this because it is slam poetry essentially, or poetry, and it is narrated by Emily Acevedo, the author, and I think it was brilliantly done. I was a little hesitant to go into this because I'm not really a poetry person, but I'd heard that the story was so impactful and so great, and that the audiobook was so great that I really wanted to pick it up. It was very impactful. It was so immersive. The audiobook was really the perfect way to consume the story. I was concerned that it would lessen my enjoyment, but I still felt like I connected to the character, and I felt like every verse was very deliberate. Every word was chosen for a reason. I think the impact was so great, and I didn't need a full book to, feel that impact of the story. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. So next, I read Every Heart a Doorway by Shannon McGuire. This is essentially a series about children's lives when they come back from Wonderland, Neverland, places like that. I didn't really like this. I gave it 2 out of 5 stars. I listened to the audiobook, and when I have since watched videos of people kind of explaining the series. It is the Wayward Children series, and from what I gather, like every other book, so first, third, etc., is filler books, meaning they're explanation books, and then second, fourth, they're like actually being in the world of the children. And I think that the first one was so short that it was hard to care or connect to anybody. The audiobook was only about 5 hours, I believe, and if we had started the story in another world and maybe the second book had been an explanation, I would have enjoyed it more. But I didn't really feel like I was getting much. We start the book in this academy for basically children that can't handle the real world once they come back from these fantasy worlds, and they all go to this school to essentially be taught how to handle what they're feeling. And I could tell that that's what it was, if that makes sense. Like when you think about going to a place like Neverland or Wonderland, you have a sense of magic, of enchantment, of adventure, and then I imagine a world outside of that would be very boring, and that's kind of how I felt. I didn't feel like that enchantment or that wonder translated very well, and even the sense of grim, the sense of darkness wasn't really there. I just didn't really enjoy it all that much. Next, I read the first volume of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. This is a graphic novel about Buffy. Each volume is about 30 pages, so the first volume was simply like an introduction into Buffy and introduced to her mentor and her friends and things like that. I didn't rate it. It wasn't really much. It was just more of an introduction volume. The Bromance Book Club by Lisa K. Adams. This is the story of a pro baseball player whose marriage is falling apart when he finds out his wife is faking orgasms in bed. They separate, and his friends convince him to join this book club of other men who have had troubles in relationships, and they essentially read romance books to get a better understanding of what women want and what they're looking for. I gave this 3 out of 5 stars. The intention of this book, I think, is great. I think the execution was fine. I just very personally had a viscerally bad reaction to this book. I'm gonna link my vlog up above that better explains my feelings, because I had an emotional reaction. But essentially what happened was, I am a child of divorce, and seeing a relationship fall apart because one spouse just didn't really care to make the changes necessary. And I felt like the wife didn't really care. She didn't acknowledge that her husband was trying to make these changes or do better about himself, and she was blaming all of their marital issues on him, even though she wasn't properly communicating with him about what was bothering her or what was going on, and she was pushing everything off on him, even though there was very clearly issues with her as well. And she was very ready for this relationship to end, and it really bothered me. In addition to that, the sister just perpetuated the toxicity. She in fact starts a fight with her sister when her sister says, hey, I'm thinking of, making this a better situation for myself, my kids, etc. She starts a fight with her, and she perpetuates this idea that she is just falling into the male main character's hands and letting him walk all over her and do whatever she wants, and I didn't like it. Next, I read The Sundown Motel by Simone St. James. This is a murder mystery book about a girl who returns to the Sundown Motel where her aunt previously worked. The aunt worked there in the 80s and she disappeared. And then our main character in present day, she goes to the motel to figure out what happened and solve the mystery, essentially, and she falls into this web of lies and secrets and things like that, and a little bit of paranormal stuff going on. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. I really liked this. It's dual POV, so it's Carly in the future and her sister Viv in the past. And so Viv was finding out things at the same time that Carly was finding out things, and it was really interesting to read about and not boring and like they're overlapping and it's just retelling over again. But they were each coming to their own conclusions, and I liked it. I thought the writing was very accessible, and I enjoyed the creepy atmosphere surrounding the town and the people in the town. The characters weren't anything great. They weren't anything to write home about. They weren't spectacular, but they were just developed enough to push the story along. The issue that I had with this book was that the story was kind of peddled as if the town has these secrets and everybody knows what happened and any newcomer is kind of shunned away, but that wasn't really the case. This kind of secret was kept, it was just not as broad as I thought it was going to be. So next, I read The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern. This is the story of a guy named Zachary who finds an unregistered book in his local library. He checks it out, and while he's reading it, he finds a chapter retelling a time in his past that no one could have experienced but him. And he kind of gets swept up in this magical world of books, and it's so good. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. It was mind-blowing. I loved Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern, which is her debut novel, and it seems like a lot of people either really like the Night Circus or they really like The Starless Sea, and I loved both. It was so beautiful, and the writing was incredibly atmospheric and enchanting. The world building was mind-boggling. You would see Erin put something in, flash something in the beginning of the story, and then at the end you're like, oh, and then it all comes together. And every single scene, sentence, or piece of dialogue was so intentional. Seeing all the stories in the world fall into place was brilliant. You could reread the book and still see more connections every single time. A common complaint that people had when they read this was they felt like the characters were very one-dimensional, but the overall theme of this story is that fate controls your life and you don't really have a choice. You're gonna do what fate wants no matter what. Because of that, I didn't really feel like the one-dimensional characters or the kind of insta-lovey story was that big of a deal. I kind of saw the intent behind it. There was one scene in particular at the end that I'm not going to spoil that kind of goes against this, but overall I understood the kind of one-dimensionalness of the stories. That being said, there were a lot of unanswered questions at the end, and that was kind of a disappointment. When I first finished the book, I was just so amazed by the story that I was like, best book I've ever read. So good, so beautiful. And then I kind of had to sit on it, and I talked to some people who'd also read it, and they were like, but did you understand this or this? And so there are not everything is wrapped up, which is okay. It doesn't necessarily have to be, but I wish that we had gotten a little bit more explanation into the ending, I guess. So next I listened to the audiobook of I'm Thinking of Ending Things by Ian Reid. This is a horror this is a mystery, I never know how to qualify them, book about an unnamed girlfriend who is visiting her boyfriend's family, and the entire journey she's thinking of breaking up with him. And on their trip back from his parents, they make a detour to this closed school, and it's like the middle of the night. And when they are like fooling around in the car, her boyfriend sees someone watching them in the school, and so he's like, I'm gonna go confront them, and he leaves and goes into the school, and so he kind of leaves her in the car alone, and she gets freaked out, so she decides to follow him. This was interesting. I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. It's an incredibly short book. I think it's like less than 250 pages, and because I listened to the audiobook, I think I liked it more than I would have if I had physically read it, because there's a point in the book where it just like switches, and listening to it was kind of crazy, but I don't think that it was as developed as I would have liked. The twist wasn't completely unguessable. There are some hints throughout that you could have guessed the ending. The atmosphere was just unsettling. The writing was unsettling, but I don't think that the ending was as developed or explained as I would have liked. Next, I read the second volume in the Buffy graphic novel series. This was introducing the villain, nothing much to go there. I read the Throne of Glass, the first book in the Throne of Glass series, I think that's what it's called. The first book is called Throne of Glass by Sarah J. Maas. This is the story of an assassin, a female assassin who was captured and becomes a slave, and then she comes to this place, this like castle, and then the king wants her to be a champion, and I don't know what the champions do exactly, but she has to like be on I'm like butchering the explanation, but essentially she has to like compete with other people to become the champion. I gave this 3 out of 5 stars. I could not stand Selena. She was really annoying. She spent pretty much the entirety of the series talking about how beautiful she was, how strong she was, she could take down any man, no mob of men, no armed guard could keep her down, but we saw 0 of that. We never saw her take anyone down. She ends up doing well in that, but in the championship thingy, but she trained, for one, every single day to do it. And so all of the like grandeur, delusions of grandeur that she has about herself are just totally misguided, and I could not stand her as a character. The writing was weird. I read A Court of Thorns and Roses, and it's pretty similar to that in its writing, in that I believe we're meant to believe that this world is some sort of like maybe Victorian-esque. That's the vibe we get. But the dialogue is incredibly modern. They use very modern language, and so it's odd that the two things are mixed. It's not bad, but it's just very jarring, so it was just weird. There was also multiple points of view, which were fine, but we got the points of view of the love interests, and the entirety of the love interest points of view were just to describe how much they were infatuated with Selena, which was kind of stupid, because there were multiple things going on in the castle at the time of this story that I think we would have benefited from knowing from their points of view, because they're more ingrained into the society of the castle than Selena is. And I think it would have made it much more interesting than just talking about how pretty they think she is. The plot was not bad. It gave me strong Divergent vibes when Triss gets into the the Dauntless camp, and then she has to like fight, and that's kind of like that's just how it was feeling. The romance was really the only thing that was keeping me rooted in the story. I distinctively rooted for one character over the other, and we didn't get an on-page kiss from the couple that I was rooting for, which is not cool. So overall, it was okay. It wasn't anything to write home about. This month I read the first and second books in the Folk of the Air trilogy. I gave both of them 4 out of 5 stars. I thought that the conclusion to the series was very strong and I really liked it, even though a lot of people didn't. I love that Jude maintained her kind of badassness throughout the entire series, and I really like that Carden didn't play more of a role than he did, if I had to be completely honest. I liked Carden. He was a good love interest, and I liked their romantic relationship, but I wanted Jude to be the focal point, and I wanted Jude to be able to show off her skill and how much she could do on her own, and I think that the little amount of Carden that was in the series was enough to build the romance, but also show us that Jude is the strong character that she is. And yeah, loving them both. Sorry, the Folk of the Air trilogy, which is these 2 books, that's the trilogy they're part of, is about Jude, who was kidnapped from the human world when she was very young and brought to the fairy world, and she has designs to basically be a knight and, you know, come up in the fairy world. So next I listened to the audiobook of A Girl Who Drank the Moon by Kelly Barnhill. This is the story of a witch who every year a village on one side of her forest sacrifices a baby to her, and she doesn't know why. So she basically takes that baby and she travels with them to the other side, the village on the other side of the forest, and she leaves them with a happy, loving family there. But on this journey, she kind of feeds the children starlight to nourish them and keep them healthy. And on accident, she feeds one of the babies moonlight. And this moonlight imbues the baby with magical powers. So she says, you know, I can't bring you to the village. I have to raise you myself. And she does. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. This is a middle grade series, so it's not exactly written for my demographic. So I can't exactly like say what was wrong with it. But it is incredibly enchanting and really beautiful and really emotional. The story, the actual writing itself is very strong. It's very enchanting, I guess you could say. And it was just overall a really good atmospheric story that I really liked. So next, I read Chain of Gold by Cassandra Clare. I would pull it down, but I don't. Where is it? Oh. I read this. This is the story of the children of the families from the Infernal Devices, which is the prequel to the Mortal Instruments. If you don't know, it's basically like the Shadowhunter Chronicles. They just fight demons and stuff. It's more than that, but it's just a lot. And this was so good. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. As you can see, I tabbed it. It was so good. I don't know what, I don't even know like how to describe how good it was. I am thinking of rereading it already. I have the audiobook, and I have been playing a lot of World of Warcraft and Animal Crossing recently. And so I was like, okay, well, I can just listen to the audiobook. Oh my gosh, it was so good. I will admit that in the very beginning, you are introduced to a lot of characters that are Tessa's kids and Charlotte's kids and all of them. So anybody that basically was in the Infernal Devices, you're dealing with their kids. And so at first it was really overwhelming because you naturally, me personally, having loved the Infernal Devices so much, I wanted to always connect each character to who their parents were, just so that I could hold on to that feeling of that love. And eventually you get to a point where you see them as their own characters, and I want to hold this again. You see them as their own characters, and so you kind of just get past that and you learn to love them. But throughout the book, you get little hints of the Infernal Devices characters, and I love it so much. And one thing I was concerned about with this series was that kind of a common theme amongst the Shadowhunter Chronicles is that parents are kind of absentee and the children are kind of left to fend for themselves. And so because I loved the Infernal Devices characters so much, I was worried that we would kind of get, not trashing, but just kind of see them as bad parents. But we didn't. They were as involved as I wanted them to be. And they were in there perfectly without overshadowing all of their kids. And the romance was sweet, and that ending, that ending. I will say, one thing I really loved about this book was that Cassandra Clare is known for being the angsty writer. She loves to write angst in her romances, and we got that, but we finally got a male character that was like willing to fess up to his feelings for his love interest, and it was just, when it happened, I was like, oh, this never happens. Look at you, Cassandra Clare. Oh, it was so good. If you are a Shadowhunter fan, read this, because it was so good. If you're not a Shadowhunter fan, you need to read it. You need to get into the Shadowhunter Chronicles because it's just so good. And so the next book I read was The Guinevere Deception by Kiersten White. This is a retelling essentially of Guinevere, of the story of Camelot, King Arthur, etc. And essentially this is the story of Merlin's daughter, who is a sorceress who he has sent to shield Arthur from a coming threat. She is not actually Guinevere. The real Guinevere died, and so she pretends to be Guinevere. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. I am a huge King Arthur Camelot fan. I will devour any and all Camelot content. So as a Camelot lover, I thought this was a very interesting new take on an already pretty popular tale. I didn't find the plot to be slow. I enjoyed the pacing. The atmosphere created was very Camelot-esque. It was very warm and comforting. The romance was insta-lovey, but balancing that against the fact that she's a teenage girl who has literally never seen another guy aside from Merlin, it wasn't that shocking, and it was kind of understandable. The magic system was definitely not as fleshed out as it needed to be. She was doing a lot of things or not able to do a lot of things that didn't really make any sense. We didn't know why she could or could not do these things, and we didn't really have a grasp on what she could and couldn't do, so it was just average. If I did not like the whole Camelot thing, I probably would have thought this was average, but I'm definitely going to pick up the next book. Okay, so we're so close to the end. We only have 4 books left to talk about. I read so much this month, holy shit. Okay. The next book that I read was The Beautiful by Renee Audier. This is the story of a girl who comes from France to America to join a convent and is supposed to find her husband after some sketchy stuff happens in her past that she's trying to run away from. She meets a girl who commissions her to make her a dress, and when she goes to the place the girl told her to meet her, she kind of gets involved in a murder, and then she gets involved with all the supernaturally stuff that's going on. I gave this 3 out of 5 stars. This was set to be the book that like brought back vampires to YA, and it was incredibly mediocre. The characters had no development. The romance was actual instant love. We had very little banter between them. We had absolutely no explanation of the world, who was who, what was what, who didn't like who. We just didn't understand anything, but it seemed like the main character did. She just innately knew everything, never questioned anything. And so it was just really average. Okay, Lock Every Door by Riley Sager. This is a story about a essentially homeless girl who, she just lost her apartment, she just lost her job, her boyfriend just broke up with her after cheating on her. She answers an ad in the paper about staying at the Bartholomew in New York as an apartment sitter, essentially. She goes to the interview and it's like beyond belief how beautiful this apartment is, and she's being paid like $12,000 to stay in this apartment for 3 months. And even though that's outrageously too good to be true. She's like, let's do it. So she does it, and then her neighbors, the other apartment sitters, start disappearing. I gave this 3 out of 5 stars. Okay, so I went into this knowing the twist, right? I was an idiot. I knew I wanted to read this, but I watched someone spoil this story for me anyways. But I kind of went into this thinking like, you know, I can still objectively rate it. I can still read it and, you know if it was written well and all that stuff. It was, and I think the execution at the end was great, but the majority of this book, about 100 pages of like I think it's like 370, about between page 150 to like 300, literally nothing happens. The plot falls off. She's trying to investigate what the heck is happening, and she literally does nothing. And it was boring. The ending was great. I liked the ending. It was cool. It was written well. If I didn't know the ending, I think it would have shocked me, but it was just not, it was not great. Okay, so next I read The Shining by Stephen King. If you are not familiar with this story, it is the story of the Torrance family who become winter maintenance people for the I literally just read this book and I cannot think of the name of the hotel. The Overlook. Wow, I suck so bad. The Torrance family essentially becomes like winter maintenance people of the Overlook Hotel, and some sketchy stuff starts happening. And the son of the couple, he has something called The Shining, and essentially he has like magical powers. He can like sense stuff, he can have visions, he can read people's minds, things like that. And so when they get into this Overlook Hotel, some shenanigans starts happening and the father seemingly loses his mind. I loved this book. I read it when I was about a freshman in high school, so it's been some years. And I listened to the audiobook because I wanted to reread it and pick up Dr. Sleep. And I gave this book 5 out of 5 stars. It was astounding. I think this is the prime example of the kind of horror that people pick up King for. It was so gripping. The atmosphere was so chilling and just so creepy. And you see all of these intricacies that go into Jack's spiral into psychosis, and it's just stunning. So Jack already kind of goes into this situation with his family on the defense. He already has an alcohol problem. He already has abusive tendencies. He comes from an abusive past, and he is just, the spiral is insane. And he starts showing to his wife like symptoms of what he used to do when he was drinking, even though he's not. And it was crazy. It was crazy. And you know, the backdrop of him going crazy and finding out these crazy facts about the Overlook, and then his family sitting over here trying to deny what they know is going on is not going on. They don't want to really believe it. They don't want to believe that he's being nasty and mean and that he's bad. And they kind of just tell themselves the whole time, you know, just one more day, we'll get through it. We just have to wait for the winter to pass. And it was so freaking good. Oh my God. It was so good. It did have some of King's like stereotypically oversaturated, tedious details, but it really set up this chilling backdrop that was just so good. It was so good. And so if you are interested in King at all and you want to read something but you're afraid of like all of these really odious books, like it's like 1,800 pages and just unnecessarily long, really honestly genuinely pick this up. I don't think it's very long. Let me find my copy. So this is my paperback edition. It is only 660 pages, and it was worth every bit of it. And I listened to the audiobook, and I think that was a fantastic way to get through kind of some of the tedious stuff. Just consume this story. It is so freaking good. You will not regret it. I am not really a King fan. I think he's a tad bit overrated. I think His writing, his ideas are fantastic, but his execution is just really lacking a lot of the time. But just read this, just believe me, just read this, it's so good. And then the last book that I actually just finished today is my book club of the month read. So I will link the Discord server that we are doing our book club for, the Cavorting Cats. And we read for this month Scythe by Neil Shusterman. And we will be continuing the series as the months go on. We are actually going to be discussing this book on Sunday, so if you want to join in the conversation, feel free to join us over there. This is essentially a utopia where humans have overcome death, and the only way that the population can kind of be controlled is through designated reapers, essentially. They're called scythes. The scythes live by their own standard, and they kill based on a quota and based on statistics from the mortality world, which is what they call us, mortality time, which is what they call their time, I guess, like them overcoming death. And we follow our two main characters, Citra and Rowan, who are essentially Scythe's apprentice, and this was really good. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. The disturbing underbelly to this like seemingly utopian society was really unsettling, and our characters were pretty, you know, easy to like or dislike. You either had the good guys or you had the bad guys, and they really just, you know, copy and paste fit into that category. So it wasn't anything groundbreaking. The romance was also not very believable. It wasn't insta-love because they didn't really call it love, but they were like really attracted to each other and really cared about each other just almost instantly. And while Citra had minimal character growth, Rowan's was impeccable, and I think the ideas that his character introduces for the rest of the series is super exciting, and I'm really, really excited to carry on with the rest of the series. I thought it was really good, and I would highly recommend it. All right, guys, so those are all of the books that I finished this month, and I thought I would do some honorable mentions of DNFs. All right. So I generally DNF about 3 books a month. I can pretty quickly figure out if I'm not going to like a book or not going to connect, and I feel like it'll be a waste of time just for me to say I hated this. So I don't have any issues putting a story down. I DNF'd quite a bit this month. So I DNF'd Saw Kill Girls by Claire Legrand. I got about 100 pages into this and nothing happened. It's the story of this town where girls are essentially being murdered, and a girl is trying to figure out with the help of her friends what the heck is going on, and it just didn't do it for me. Then I DNF'd The City of Brass by, I'm not gonna try to pronounce the last name, it'll just be right here. I got about 20% of the way through this. It's 570 pages. This is essentially a magical realism. It's involving genies and like a magical city, but it's really about the rebellion from it wasn't really explained. There's like a lower class of people, I think they're genies. They're rebelling against their rulers. I'm not into political plots in my stories, so I just didn't really like this. Next, I DNF'd A Number in the Ashes by Sahaba Tahir. I think I got 20% of the way into this. I usually get about 20% of the way into most books. This is the story of a girl whose brother gets kidnapped and by the government of her place, and so she goes to the resistance that are trying to overthrow the government, and she's like, you know, he got stolen because of y'all, you need to help me. And they say, okay, well, we'll help you if you infiltrate this military academy. And then we also get a point of view of a guy in the military academy that's trying to defect, and it was boring. Yeah, I just didn't, yeah. And then the last book that I DNF'd was A Study in Charlotte by Brittany Cavallero. This is essentially a Sherlock Holmes and Watson situation where the female main character is Sherlock Holmes's great-great-granddaughter, and then the male is Watson's great-great-grandson, and they are at a school together, and there's a murder, and like they're working to solve it. I got 20% of the way in, and it was boring. They weren't doing really any investigating. The Watson was like super in love with Sherlock for no reason, or with Holmes for no reason. And Holmes was basically just a carbon copy of Sherlock. She didn't have any defining characteristics aside from like him. She even down to playing the same instrument as Sherlock Holmes, so it just wasn't good. So yeah, those are all of the books that I read this month. I read so much. I'm so proud of myself. I don't know what it was. I think I've been working from home the majority of the month, so I think that really helped. But yeah, I think I had a great month and I read some really good books. So yeah, I hope you guys really enjoyed this wrap up. Feel free to comment anything you want down below. If you read these books and loved them, if you hated them, let's have a discussion. Comment all that down below. Look out for my May TBR coming soon. I have some cool stuff planned for May, and I will catch you guys in my next video. Thanks so much.